So we'll have, first of all, the CEO of PAVE, which is an acronym for Proactive Anti-Violence Education, speak first. The CEO, Arlene Lemus, is, for those of you in sport, incredibly successful as an amateur athlete, won the Olympic gold medal for the United States in 1988 in Seoul, Korea, and in addition went on to being an incredibly successful business person in her own right, and now has turned all that talent and energy and passion towards this work, first starting and helping to prevent violence and abuse in athletes and in coaching, and now to the CEO of PAVE Prevention, which is a human development consulting company focusing on training and development in the workplace. Please welcome Arlene Lemus.
Thank you, Heather. I'll just quickly run through a little bit more of my background, and then we'll move on to our presentation on what PAVE is doing and why it's so important. As Heather shared, my name is Arlene Lemus. I'm the CEO of PAVE Prevention, Proactive Anti-Violence Education. My path to this point has been incredibly interesting, and I'll share a little bit with you. I'm a lifelong martial artist. I started martial arts when I was 5 years old. I don't remember much life without it. I have 4 older brothers. 2 of them are black belts as well. So I was just the baby tagging along with my older siblings. At 5 years old, I was the only female in the martial arts school, and the only non-adult. I was surrounded by adult men, most of them back from the Vietnam War, out of the Korean War, and I hung out there. I was the mascot, I think, more than a co-student. That martial arts that I fell in love with took me into not only the martial arts path, but the competitive martial arts path. I started competing in Chicago locally, regionally, nationally, which led me to a spot on the representing Team USA in the Olympic Games in Seoul, Korea, the first time that my sport was ever included in the Olympic Games. After retiring from competition, I took the helm as one of the national coaches quite quickly, and started participating in my sport as a coach and a leader in that way. And both as an athlete and as a coach, I noticed very early on predatory behavior from coaches, administrators, elite athletes to other athletes. And I started noticing things like, an incredible athlete on the rise just disappearing, or performance would drop so substantially that someone who was a rising star was now losing in the first round of competition. And it was right about this time that I crossed paths with a group of women that had been doing something that I heard about called empowerment self-defense. And empowerment self-defense was something that was born out of the feminist martial art movement, and that really tried to fill the void that male martial arts instructors weren't filling and providing for their female students. And so I crossed paths with this group of incredible women teaching empowerment self-defense, and I said, this is it. Because I'm teaching athletes and martial artists how to punch, how to kick, how to protect themselves at the highest level. Their physical skills are world champion and Olympic champion level. But they can't set a boundary. They can't identify inappropriate coercion. They can't use their voice. They can't say no. And so these group of skills, this is what was missing. And from that point on, I became head, shoulders, waist, knees into pushing this skill set, these human safety skills forward. And that's what led me to taking the helm at PAVE Prevention, which aims to end violence in the workplace. And I'll talk about that being my Trojan horse, but I'll share more about that concept a little bit later. So you've heard about my path and how I got there. We're going to share a little video with you now with one of our macro responders in Oakland, share a bit about her experience with PAVE and how she's using it at work.
Hello, my name's Francesca Workbrand. I'm also an EMT and a field supervisor. I work for Macro. Macro stands for Mobile Assistance Community Responders of Oakland. We're an alternative community response program for nonviolent and non-emergency 911 calls. So anything that ranges from a wellness check, behavioral concerns, and community disturbances. We want to meet the needs of the community with compassionate care response model. So with that, we use empathy, service, and community. I like to throw in dignity as well. Our goal is to reduce the responses by police, resulting in fewer arrests and negative interactions, and increased access to community-based services and resources for impacted individuals and families. I believe PAVE training has been a useful tool to Macro while we're out in the field. We serve the community 7 days a week, so I know it's helped me fine-tune my skills, such as situational awareness, knowing how to exit the scene that is potentially not safe, whether it's verbally or nonverbal. You know, if someone says, hey, we have to call, or they just give me the side eye, like, let's go or not. I'm great to know what those cues are, being able to create a safe space for our community and our responders as well. We use different communication techniques to have discussions, whether it's around trauma, violence, and being able to address it properly. We also learn how to set boundaries, and knowing your own limitations is very important. PAVE training has helped me professionally and personally, whether it's, more of my communication skills, to feel more confident and comfortable, learning ways how to decompress or grounding myself, especially in stressful situations, and knowing how to do some self-care for myself. I've improved on my de-escalation skills, knowing how to approach recipients or team members. Learning boundaries is important, being able to adapt to different changes. If I need to go left, I can go instantly, and of course, in adapting to our environment out there in the field. I firmly believe that everyone should take a PAVE training, especially for the organizations that are out in the field. I've had my own personal and work experiences. It's helped shape me, but with PAVE, it's helped sharpen my skills a bit more. We went into PAVE training. Some of us were aware of boundaries, some of us weren't. Some of us are more verbal now when we need space or we need a few moments to ourselves, being able to be open-minded and being able to take constructive criticism and being able to adapt around my teammates because everyone's different.
Yeah. But first, I'd like to just address the problem. Violence in the workplace is any act or threat of the following that occurs in the workplace. And that can be verbal abuse, psychological abuse, or the lack of psychological safety, physical abuse, economic abuse, sexual violence, harassment, intimidation, threatening or disruptive behavior. And we like to use this visual here of the dominoes that small things, small microaggressions may start. The dominoes start falling, it escalates to even something more dramatic, and also violence against oneself, which I think is often ignored when we discuss the spectrum of violence. Also, when violence in the workplace is addressed or discussed, I think we forget to acknowledge violence that may occur outside work that we bring in forms of our own trauma and how it's impacting our daily work performance. So I think that all of these things and what we bring in needs to be discussed when we're discussing the culture of the workplace that we work within. As of late, there have been some incredible discussions, incredible research, incredible presentations that all points to PAVE being on the right path. So in addition to this that came out late last year from the U.S. Surgeon General, and I will apologize that a lot of the stats you see on here will be very U.S.-centric, but I think it's important. I think the U.S. does lead the way in many of these categories. Here we have a report from the U.S. Surgeon that came out last year. And right at the top, protection from harm, safety, and security in the workplace, paramount. And then it also talks about something here that I think is really important. And if we don't see things that are physically violent or physical assault, we're not paying attention to it. But here, it suggests quite easily that a toxic culture, these 5 things are the contributor. Disrespectfulness, non-inclusive, unethical, cutthroat, and abusive. Doesn't talk about anything physical. It is this death by 10,000 paper cuts that's getting us. So I think that not only with what the Surgeon General is saying, but OSHA is saying it, the CDC has included violence in the workplace in their Healthy People 2030 initiative. We're finally seeing other people are starting to talk about this in the way that we've known about it for a very, very long time. This next report graphic up here is something that's incredibly important. This is by the International Labor Organization, and these are just a few of the stats. I mean, the statistics are incredible. 743 million people globally, 1 in 5 people, 1 in 5 persons have experienced at least one form of violence or harassment at work. This report came out last year, so this is current data. 277 million, 1 in every 10 of us. Physical violence and harassment, and women are twice as likely than men to experience that. 38% of women were more likely to experience violence and harassment over their working life compared to 26% of men. Young women were twice as likely as young men to experience sexual violence and harassment. Of course, this percentage increases for migrant women. If you're self-employed, you have a little more control over what's going on. I would also share that what we're finding at PAVE, that these numbers, these statistics rise when you're talking about pink-collar sector work. If you're a nurse, if you're a social worker, those sectors of work where women lead the way, these statistics are even higher. One more thing I want to say about these statistics, because they are staggering, is I would remind everyone that the financial inequities and inequalities, unfortunately, it's central to the female experience worldwide. It diminishes our autonomy. It impacts our life within the workplace and within the workforce. And it contributes to our oppression. It continues to impact us in domestic violence situations, in interpersonal violence situations, and society on a whole. So creating a world of work free from violence and harassment, and this is where I think PAVE has approached this differently, because we're starting to present it in a way that rings on ears at the C-suite level differently. It is affecting and impacting your bottom line. We knew it, but now we're showing it in a different way. We know that if you can create a better work culture, a safer work culture for your employees, you're going to have increased productivity. You're going to reduce absenteeism. You're going to lower your turnover rates. You're going to save on recruiting, save on your training costs, all those things. This is what's being spent. And these are just a few. I could fill 10 slides with statistics just like this. $1 billion a week is being paid out for workers' compensation costs. $130 billion a year spent due to workplace violence-related legal expenses, property damage, and loss of productivity. When this says loss of productivity, I would also say here how many people are coming to work but they're not as present as they possibly could be because of violence that they're experiencing at work or violence that they've experienced outside of work and bringing in. $4.1 billion a year paid out in medical costs related to domestic violence. And again, it's not all those little things that we can't put a dollar figure on yet. On are they showing up to work, showing up to the workforce, being able to hit on all cylinders. That's not even tabulated into these crazy figures. And this one, everybody sees this. For every $1 invested in the workplace for workplace safety, 3 or more is saved. I would also argue here that this dollar that's been invested in workplace safety has been a very check-the-box approach. So imagine if we really get creative in our approach to this, what we're going to save. That's my argument with PAVE, that our creativity and the way we approach this training, that $3 number is going to go way up. We have research and everything now is in agreement with us. So we feel strengthened in our convictions to pursue this. We see the costs in dollars and we know the cost in human capital. Enterprises that are known for having respectful and inclusive work environments have a higher market value, a better reputation. They're recruiting the best talent, increasing investor confidence. We are working with our collaborative to create a whole investment group that chooses to invest in companies that have a better workplace culture, that works actively to reduce violence in the workplace. Happier and healthier employees, better customer and client satisfaction ratings, and alignment with the UN Sustainable Development Goals. There are more than this, believe it or not, that reducing violence in the workplace can align with, but these are the ones we put up. Overall, even without all this, we know in this room it's just the right thing to do. It just happens that this right thing to do will also make all this better. So I would say that we embrace the term moral imagination, and we look at these issues and we look at these problems in a creative way that doesn't have to compromise financial success, that we can find ways that can be ethical, that can be sustainable, and that can be morally the right thing to do. So moral imagination combined with creative and moral courage enables both individuals and businesses to act more ethically in society. Creativity and moral courage, that's what we're looking for. And as we move through this post-pandemic world, I think more than ever, this is what we need. And I will share that I believe strongly if we empower the individual with a set of universal precautions and a set of human safety skills, this is where we have the most change. And this is where we can stop violence. We can interrupt the dominoes of violence from falling early on before it gets to something full-blown. This slide tells a little bit about what PAVE Prevention does. It's really heavily based in scenario-based training. It creates those human safety skills of setting boundaries, assertive communication, managing conflict. It's customizable and scalable. We have access to high-level training worldwide. This graphic is really important to me because by empowering the individual, we change the makeup of work culture, creating a healthier culture. These skill sets don't only stay at home. This is that Trojan horse I was talking about. The skill set doesn't only stay at work, but it's taken home. It's taken into your community. Now you have an empowered family, and you have an ability here to change what has happened generationally. It has impact on really changing what that next generation in that household looks like. And then in turn, the communities they're in, the societies that they live within, this is changing as well. So there's this constant circle of pushing those dominoes of violence in the other direction. We're coming in and we're going to say your workplace is going to be more productive and all these things are going to happen. But really, I'm looking to empower that individual that, yes, it will improve your workplace, but it's going to improve the world. Dr. Mary Clyde Pierce, a professor at Northwestern and also a physician at Lurie's Children's Hospital in Chicago, is doing epigenetic research that shows a switch in our cells, literally, when we've been traumatized by violence, and then how we can flip those epigenetic switches in a different direction by training like this.
Hello, my name is Mary Clyde Pierce, and I'm a pediatric emergency medicine physician at Lurie Children's Hospital in Chicago, and I'm a professor of pediatrics at Northwestern. Part of my job is actually research. It's the part I feel the most passionate about, actually. My focus has been on child abuse and the violence and recognizing these violent environments these children are coming from. Part of my passion is developing tools that help us recognize and diagnose abuse early on. Then the other part is understanding the biological impact that violence has on these children. It's not just the injury that's causing damage. In fact, that injury may be the least of that child's worries. We know that there's a biological cascading effect that occurs in the child's genes through epigenetics, what turns genes on or off. And so when children are exposed in these violent environments to different stressors, their stress response becomes dysregulated, or it can become dysregulated if it's not mitigated. That's the other area I feel passionate about. How do we recognize when children are exposed to these violent environments, and how do we intervene to actually prevent them from developing these health problems that occur later in life, like mental health problems, cancers, cardiovascular diseases? All of these things have higher rates of occurrence in children that have been exposed to early life violence. I'm very excited about the work that we're doing. We're collaborating. I'm excited about the work that PAVE is doing, because believing that environmental violence is actually an environmental toxin and treating it like that is really kind of a paradigm shift in how we think about it. We would never tolerate lead being given to our children in schools. We would never tolerate our children living in lead environments. And just like lead is a toxin that actually gets into a child's biology and causes them to decrease IQs, we know that violence exposure in violent environments can even have a greater impact on a child's IQ. So that's why it's so critical that we get it right. We get it right at the beginning. We treat it like something to be mitigated and not something to just be placated or something to just say, oh, well, that's what happens. It's an environmental toxin that we actually have the ability to recognize. And now, is through epigenetic research that our group is doing, and many people across the country and across the world are looking how violence causes us to have a biological response. And then if it's not mitigated, or things are not intervened or stopped, that violence then can actually go on to cause health problems that lead to all kinds of decreased intelligence, decreased ability to cope with problems. What we do know is that the body also has this ability to respond in a way to the environment that's healthy. And when we come in and we can help, and when we work with families or work environments where we decrease and help decrease violence that's occurring, then we're able to put that child back on a healthy trajectory and help them find their potential that they're meant for. So I appreciate the time, and I hope that PAVE can actually continue to do the amazing work that they're doing. And as we as a group support what they're doing, I think that amazing things can happen as we shift how we think about violence and treat it like the toxin that it is. Thank you.
We've created an organizational assessment that allows us to partner with a company, an organization, an association, and really give a score around toxicity in the workplace. And we're able to give real information on culture characteristics, aggressive behaviors, how the company responds to aggressive behaviors in forms of reporting and support, well-being, and overall feelings of what the employee feels in the workplace. And that's our employee experience survey. So there's a real score that as we move forward, we'll be able to someday say, Coca-Cola has this score and we recommend working for them. It's coupled with a self-descriptive inventory that gives more feedback on the individual and their communication skills. In addition, as we move forward collecting more data on these assessments, we'll be able to do really in-depth information. So if someone is experiencing workplace bullying more than twice a month, they're 42% more likely to leave their job. We'll be able to come up with these type of important analytics. So we reached out saying we were going to change your culture in the workplace and create a more productive and healthier workforce for you. And then we found a couple niches. One of those niches was the macro responders in Oakland. And out of their public safety task force, Reimagining Public Safety, the macro responders were born. And they respond to low acuity calls in the Oakland area. And we train them in situational awareness, de-escalation, better communications, check-in policies. We really are proud of the work we've done in Oakland. We also found another connection. We engaged Nellies shelter just as employee training, employee engagement, some human development work for their staff. And it was so well embraced and so well received that leadership, who you'll hear from in a second, said, okay, we got to find a way to get this skill set to our community. Literally, the executive director said, I'd like to put Nellies out of business. if we can give people the skill set so they don't have to come to the shelter. Of course, we know we're never going to get to that place, unfortunately. But the idea was, let's turn this into something where our outreach and our programming puts these human safety skills out into our community. So that's also another creative partnership. Much like macro, our creative partnership within the shelter sector is developing. So thank you for listening. Thank you for your time today. And I'm going to hand over the mic to the Executive Director of Nellies, Jyoti Singh.
Before we started, I just wanted to do a land acknowledgement. And in the spirit of unity and equity, and with complete gratitude and humility, I want to acknowledge, and please excuse me for any mispronunciations, but I want to acknowledge that we are located on the ancestral Lenape homelands, and we recognize the long-standing significance of these lands for the Lenape nations, past and present. We're also conscious that New York City has the largest urban Native population, we use Indigenous in Canada, Indigenous population in the United States. And we really do strongly believe that the historical awareness of Indigenous exclusion and erasure is critically important in all the work we do, and that we're committing to working to overcome the effects of colonialism. So, my name is Jyoti Singh, and I'm the Executive Director for Nellies.
Hi everyone, my name is Ariana Gomes. I am the Violence Prevention Manager at Nellies.
And I wanted to start by asking you to join me on a journey. So could you please imagine a young woman, it's the holiday season, a young woman is out, has had a beautiful day with her mother. They've gotten their nails done, they've bonded, and they've decided that they're going to stop at a cafe to pick up a coffee. And while they're in line getting their coffee, someone comes up behind them and touches one of the women from behind, the young woman. She turns to her mom. She says, "Mom, did you touch me?" Mom's like, "No." And then the mom's, "Did you touch me?" They were very uncomfortable. It became very clear that the man behind them had just touched them inappropriately. Those women left the cafe, and the man followed them. In speaking with Arlene, when I told her this story, and I'm not going to tell you how that ended, but you could follow that story in your imagination, please, and where it could go. And when I was talking to Arlene said to me, "Wow, Jyoti, there's up to, on average, 14 small instances, those dominoes that she talked about, up to 14 of those instances that will eventually lead to a full assault." So I just want you to hold that story in your mind. When we met PAVE and the ESD, so the Empowerment Self-Defense Network, we were really intrigued. Here was something that was dynamic, that we thought was really going to make a change. And we embraced it. And sometimes it can be difficult to embrace, especially when we're working in the not-for-profit sector, in the gender-based violence system, because when you think about empowerment and self-defense, it can have a negative connotation and the feeling that we are going to continue to promote violence, which is not the case. And so we're very excited to be here today to share our vision with you. So Nellies Shelter, we have a couple of sides to our business. We've got our shelter, our crisis shelter. We do community programs, and we've now switched our verbiage to empowerment, and we work on advocacy.
When we were preparing for this presentation, Jyoti and I were talking about my past as a swimming instructor, and we were talking about how all of the little children, especially the little girls, before they got in the pool, 3 or 4 years old, they would go to the side and they would say, "Are there sharks in the water? Like, I'm scared of being eaten by a shark." And so we were talking about, why are children so afraid of these ocean predators? And we decided to look up the statistic, and we saw you actually only have a 1 in 11.5 million chance of being attacked by a shark. And so we were talking about how sharks are villainized and the fear that is just inherent in people that are near the water. And we really were reflecting on, why are children so scared of these ocean predators? when we know in the gender-based violence field what dangers these young girls are soon going to encounter, especially with the odds being so astronomically high being attacked by a shark, when really there's predators within their socials.
So we've got some stats in our presentation. We know globally that the numbers are quite high. The United Nations was one of the first to coin the shadow pandemic, right? So we had COVID. We had this pandemic across the world that we were all living with, but it also shed a light on the second pandemic, that shadow pandemic of gender-based violence, which has been there since the dawn of time, but now there was a spotlight on it. And what we started looking at it. So what we learned was that when we look at how much is spent on humanitarian responses between 2016 and 2018, so we're talking about the cost and what we're putting into, up to $41.5 billion spent on humanitarian responses in those 2 years, only 51.7 or less than 0.2% was spent on gender-based violence prevention for women and girls around the world. That's it, 0.2%. It is shame. And so the statistic that came out in 2021 from the World Health Organization was that approximately 30% of women and young girls between the ages of 15 and 49 have experienced some form of violence. That's not okay. Yeah. And so we're going to just talk about the Canadian context. So, of course, we saw the numbers rise. We were getting increased crisis calls. And in Canada, the number is 4 in 10 women are experiencing violence and abuse. And what happened at that time at Nellies is when everybody else was going insular, we broke the mold and we went outward. And we started saying, this is not okay. Women are even more vulnerable. They're stuck at home with their abusers. We're losing spaces in the shelter because of COVID and having to socially distance. We're losing those beds. They can't call the crisis line because they're in an enclosed space with somebody that wants to do them harm. And it's time we start changing the dialogue. So that's where we started internally. We started changing our dialogue and we started asking the question. We started to realize what our business was. And our business is crisis, unfortunately. And to explain that, there's a disproportionate level of funding that happens. For some reason, our governments or our communities put money into crisis. Look at health. We're always putting money into our hospitals. We're always putting money in managing the crisis. It's no different for us at Nellies. The vast majority of our funding goes towards our shelter. It's a crisis shelter. It's deemed a crisis shelter. Women can stay there for 3 months, although, of course, we are lax on that because not everybody can stabilize in 3 months. And it's dealing with an issue when the violence has already happened. Why are we doing that? If our business is crisis, the question that we started to ask ourselves is, should it be? And we came back with an emphatic no. We don't want crisis to be our business. So we started reevaluating our goals. We decided that we want to stop being reactive to violence and we want to start working on prevention. And again, like I said, when everybody was going insular, we went outwards. And we were really lucky because we found some great partners in PAVE and the Empowerment Self-Defense Network that heard our call. And it's funny, just recently I was doing a blog for Nellies and I talked about, we just followed the breadcrumbs. We opened our mind, we went outwards when everybody else was going inward, and we followed the breadcrumbs. And that's why we're here where we are today. Something that's been coming across my life for the past few years is transformative justice. And so transformative justice, I feel really like if we look at the definition, it's a political framework and it's an approach to responding to violence, harm, and abuse at its most basic. It seeks to respond to violence without creating more violence and engaging in harm reduction to lessen the violence. It can be thought of making things right, getting it right in relation, and creating justice together. And I love this idea of restorative justice, transformative justice. How do we do it with gender-based violence, especially when someone who's perpetrated the harm may not be willing to come to the table, where you cannot have that dialogue and restore the balance in that relationship and heal from that harm? How do you do that when the woman is not capable at that point to be able to sit across from somebody and have that discussion? How do we still achieve restorative justice? And so we started exploring the individual. And so this really spoke to us. Transformative justice focuses on the mind, body, and soul of the individual. We start to realize you don't need to have somebody across the table to heal. We have the power within ourselves. The women we serve, the people that have experienced violence, we are much more powerful than the other, and that we can work within ourselves to heal from our collective past. We can start dealing with intergenerational violence and trauma, and we can approach it with knowledge and respect.
So as Jyoti mentioned, we went outsular. We went and we took trainings on becoming empowerment self-defense instructors. We did rock and water training, and we versed ourselves in nonviolent communication. And when we did the 3 programs, we learned that violence prevention is not a one-size-fits-all approach, and that we need to be customizing our program for the communities that we're working with, and working with the communities to give them something that they are interested, that reflects their interests, wants, and needs. So using the principles of empowerment self-defense, which Arlene had mentioned earlier, the think, yell, run, fight, tell, as well as the anti-bullying techniques from Rock and Water, which is a children's violence prevention program, as well as the giraffe and jackal imagery from nonviolent communication, we worked towards creating our own violence prevention programming. So what we did was we customized 2 separate streams. So one was for teenage girls and women. So again, we worked with them on using their voice, setting boundaries, learning how to identify exits, leaving situations. We then wanted to make the program digestible for the children. So we've been working with students from grade 3 to 5 in some schools in Toronto and the GTA. And what we did was we used those same principles that we learned in empowerment self-defense, but we made them using the giraffe and jackal imagery. We wanted to really make sure it reflected our organization, our anti-racist, anti-oppression values, our strength-based model, transformative justice. And so what we do is we do play-based situational activities with the children. We go through, how would a wolf respond? How would their giraffe respond? We do some discussions and debriefs, and then we ask, what would you be? And we found that this dialogue between them has allowed children to set boundaries with each other, with their teachers, and really allowed them to use their voices, which we saw in the pandemic. As they were in online school for 2 years, they really forgot how to. So we were reintroducing these skills. So we started really truly doing this program in January. And since January, we've already connected with 58 women in the community running programming. And we've also connected with 181 children who have gone through a few stages, which in total is 239 unique individuals as of today. And we're really excited at the future and how we can continue empowering women and children to set these boundaries, because as we know, violence is perpetrated most often by someone you know. And so we're trying to give them the skills to stop it before it starts.
Cool. Thank you. Yeah, we're quite proud of ourselves. It's that Canadian ego that we have. No, it's really a collective effort, and we're very, very much grateful to Heather, who actually introduced the idea to us and started introducing us to different people in the network. And it has been just so nice to find people around the world that have helped us develop this idea. My family is here, right? So I've got 4 kids. And yes, and they're all here, and I love embarrassing them when I'm in a presentation. But this time, I'm going to embarrass my youngest one. Daisy, can you please stand up? Hi, Daisy. Daisy's school that goes into Daisy's school and does the Rock and Water program with them. And I talk about this stuff, but my kids aren't going to listen to me. They're like, oh, Mom, there you go again. And it's so funny. After the first day of Ariana introduced the jackal or the wolf and the giraffe. And I went in and I'm like, and I was surprised. All the kids are like, I want to be a wolf. I want to be a wolf. And the teachers are the ones that told us, listen, you guys can't tell the kids just to be giraffes. Like, because sometimes you need to be a jackal. You need to be a wolf and you need to stand up and speak for yourself. And the giraffe is known as like the land mammal with the largest heart. And so it teaches empathy and has a long neck and can see everything. And like the jackal is on the floor, doesn't see everything and will attack without knowing the whole story. And so I was like, why do kids want to be a wolf? If I was a kid, I'd want to be a giraffe. And then we had this very serious discussion about why Ariana would want to be a wolf when she was younger. Like the imagery. And it's funny what I saw, because I got to see the effect of the program. That very day, Daisy came in and started using what she'd learned. And she said to me, not to me, she's been saying it to her siblings. They'd be like, what kind of a reaction is that, Daisy? Are you being a jackal or a giraffe? She goes, this situation requires me to be a jackal. And she's not apologetic for it. And it's good, right? Like the teachers really made us want to put a balance on that. And so that's just one small kid that lives with this crazy mom. And so we've got 3 girls and a boy, and there's so much estrogen in our house. And that's just one story. So I'm thinking how many kids? 151 kids that we've been dealing with. All those stories are multiplying when they go home. One of the challenges is we have is that, or at least I have, is how can I tell people that Nellies wants to end violence? How can we end violence? Violence will always be there. It has always been there. From the moment that we enter this world, we are dealing with trauma, right? It's very traumatic for the mom to give birth, but it's also very traumatic for the child to come out of that birth canal or however it is. So we know trauma and violence will always be there. What we're trying to do, what we've coined it for ourselves at Nellies is that we are trying to change the narrative. We know we cannot end violence. What we do know is that we can disrupt the narrative so that women and young girls can start taking control to change the end result, what that story is. Last night, my team and I, we were very fortunate to go see Margaret Atwood. So Margaret Atwood is this world-renowned Canadian author, wrote The Handmaid's Tale for those. And she was so inspiring and so many things came up. And I'm gonna hold off on telling you what Margaret Atwood said that inspired us. Instead, I'm going to ask you guys to revisit that story with me again of the young girl and the mom, and we're gonna go through the story again. So the young woman and the mom, they've both been touched, and they're frozen. They don't know what to do. But in this version of the story, they don't run. They don't leave. They tell the clerk in front, excuse me, that guy, I think he just touched us inappropriately. The barista or the store associate, not knowing what to do either, was like, oh, excuse me, sir, there's a complaint. Did you touch these women? And he's, oh no, I just brushed up to them. I'll just sit over there. I'm going to get my coffee. Goes and sits down. Okay, a little nervous, mom and daughter go about their day, start taking selfies. Okay, maybe it was a misunderstanding. And the gentleman comes up behind the young girl again and says something so vulgar in her ear that you can imagine she probably froze at that point. But instead of leaving, she turned around and she used her ready stance. So what we teach, or what we've learned through empowerment self-defense, Rock and Water teaches the same things to the kids, and PAVE is the ready stance. So she whips around and goes into her ready stance and says, back off. This is her ready stance. Back off. You can go back or you can go forward. It doesn't matter. And we usually start with the word stop or no. She chose to use the word back off. Can I get everybody to stand up and practice this? Yeah. And let's just do it. And then we'll do it together and feel the power of this. So you're going to put your hands up. You can step back or you can step forward. It doesn't matter. And you're going to go stop, no, back off, whatever you feel comfortable with. Stop! That's great. That's what she did. That's what she did. Instead of leaving, that's what she did. Back up now. Loud voice. Mom, who'd known that her daughter had gone through this training? Yeah. That's mom's reaction. Yeah. They changed the narrative. That man flew out of that store. What's the true story? This second one is the true story. The first one was my imagination, or our imagination of where it could have gone. The true story, that young girl had gone through our training, had learned our program, had assaults in her past where she was lucky and did not result in anything worse than what she had experienced. And for the first time, I would venture to say, she changed that narrative. When I heard this story, everybody was like, oh my God, I hope you're okay, And I'm like, I really hope you're okay. But this tells me we're on the right path. We are doing the right thing. We are changing the narrative. Now back to Margaret Atwood. What she said, somebody asked her during the Q&A yesterday. She said, they asked the question, so should writers only write from their experience? Do they have to experience something to be able to write it? And her response was, no. If you did that, we wouldn't be able to write a book. But she said, you first have to believe it yourself. And that's how, Margaret said, she knew she was on the right path when she was writing something. If she believed it, and if it scared her, or she could imagine it and believe it, she knew her writing was good. I ask all of you today, please embrace the fact that we can change the narrative. I don't want to say we're going to end violence. We're not going to end violence. It's always going to be there. But we can embrace the concept of our inner power and changing that narrative. And that's what we would like to please ask all of you guys to share in that dream and embrace that message. And we would love to come back next year or the year after and give you even more stories and more ideas and examples of how we're changing that narrative for women and children in the GTA and hopefully across Canada. And as we continue to work with our partners at PAVE and ESD Global, we are very much looking forward to changing that narrative. Thank you so much.
I know we saw a lot of body language which indicated, yes, we know this in our hearts and in our bodies, what it feels like to have our space compromised, our ability to work, our ability to operate safely, to contribute our best selves in the workplace and as volunteers. So it's important to be able to delineate what that means in the workplace, in our volunteer lives, and to have that freedom to express ourselves. That's what this work is all about. I know you've been taking notes. That's terrific. In a moment, we're going to invite Arlene and Jyoti to facilitate some of the questions that you have that are top of mind. More about how this plays out. How could it play out in your community? How do you form these relationships? What does it take to make these connections happen? We have an extraordinary opportunity over the next several days to connect with thousands of people across the world who are here for much the same reason. This is the opportunity. This is our time to do it. What are your questions? Who has the first question? Okay, great. Hold that. Some other questions? Please come up.
We'll stay fast. Oh, I think we've deserved the privilege to sit down.
But they're very individual.
No, but that.
What did it feel like to take that ready stance. Did you feel invigorated? Yes. And your body gets engaged. That's what it feels like to be part of this work. We truly engaged in it. So our first question is over here. If you're comfortable doing so, please give us your name, your organization, and your question, please.
Hello, my name is Judith Mon. I come from Norway, from the Optimist organization, Optimist International, and I have a question for you. Norway is a highly digitalized society, and I was wondering, with workplaces expanding more into digital interaction, do you think the workplace violence will change the occurrence of, do you think it will change the workplace violence or take another form? I hope you could understand my question.
Nervous. My gut tells me will take another form, but I think disrupting those dominoes, those principles are still there. So still setting a boundary, still using your voice, still learning to say no, still even a sense of digital situational awareness, I think will be formed. I think the skill set is still going to transfer even in a digital age. But I wish just moving to online will end bullying and end violence, but we know that's not going to happen. It's already happening and it's taking different shapes online and digital.
I do have something to add. It's not just the workplace, it's happening in schools. So when we piloted this at Clairville School and we had our first initial meeting with the teachers, they asked us, because it really is a pilot. Like Rock and Water is something that came out of the Netherlands. HEMA and the Gdaku Institute are the ones that have created Rock and Water. And we've adapted it because as wonderful as it is, for Nellies, it wasn't a good fit for what our mandate and our vision is. So that's why we've started going into nonviolent communication, the giraffe and jackal, making it, Rock and Water is very child friendly, but we wanted to focus more on the boundaries. And so really it is a pilot for us right now because it's not Rock and Water as it's envisioned. It's got a twist on it and a bit more trauma informed and anti-racist and anti-oppression kind of framework to it. But the teachers, so we told them, tell us what's going on in the playground and let us adapt because we haven't created the work plan or the lessons. We're only creating 2 at a time because it's our pilot. And they came back to us and said, we need you guys to talk about online bullying. It's been great because as we're piloting with Clairville Public School, we are trying to figure that out. And invite us again, community of the United Nations next year. We'll tell you what we learned.
I'll also share that within our collaborative and the ESD collaborative, there's work in Albania that is taking recreation programming right into the middle schools. So it's part of their PE program. So that also has a segment of this online approach to this, stopping this bullying, intimidation, and online and digital level as well.
Thank you. What's the next question, please? Girl, I'm going to have this to you. As long as you agree to give it back to me.
Thank you very much. So my name... Okay. My name is Madeline. I'm from the SES Education Foundation. And I guess I have 2 questions. So obviously, I'm still in high school. I'm only 17. I guess I have a question more of like how to approach. Obviously, I've been faced with disgusting, gross comments. I used to work in a hardware store. Lots of gross things go on there. And I have always felt like I'm making a big deal of it, like it's not really that big of a problem, like this is just how it's going to happen. And I feel like that is definitely the mindset for a lot of people my age, especially. And so my first question is, what advice can you give to other like young girls my age, even younger, to validate when they're being spoken to or looked at in inappropriate ways? And then my second question is, how do you think we should go about educating like younger boys to learn to respect women and treat them humanely so we can try to curb this type of behavior in the future?
Thank you. 2 amazing questions, which I'm sure they've been tackling at the United Nations across the street for quite some time. So thank you for bringing them up here.
First and foremost, thank you for your questions. And it's unacceptable. It's unacceptable that we've moved as a society to it's just part of the course. It's just part of the job. It's just boys being boys. It's just what happens. So it's over. Yes. Okay, that is unacceptable. All right. And to your point about boys and men, I think that's one of the nice strengths that PAVE has, because our programming is not specifically gender-based violence. It is, when we come into a company or we work with our clients, it's across all genders. So what happens every time is there is a person in the room who has to acknowledge, oh, I'm one of those guys. And then a conversation can start. And that's why I think what PAVE is doing is so important. Not that gender-based violence is not incredibly important. Of course, it is. But I think our approach in engaging people of all genders, it takes a different hold. And we see it every single time someone's saying, ooh, I'm so sorry, I've been got in the office.
Really good questions. There's really no simple answer. And it goes, I think you've set it up really well, the question, but it goes even more in depth, because then we haven't even considered intersectional thoughts, right? Around that culturally, where they're coming from, socially, like the structures that they're facing with at home and what they've seen and experienced. So it's not easy to tackle. And I'm going to go back to that concept that when gender-based violence and crisis shelters, we tend to be insular anyway, because people can't know our location, because we can't be flashy. So then how do you have this dialogue? And in our sector, we tend to not want to work with the men. Sorry to say. There's a barrier there. And so I think that the approach that we've taken at Nellies is that we know that we've got to take a multi-pronged approach. And that's why we're going so strongly into the schools now. Because I think if we want to change the narrative over the long term, we have to start at all levels, particularly the young people, and move our way through. Nellies this summer is also going to be taking this concept of nonviolence into the elders community, right? Like for elder abuse and so on. And particularly where I live in the Greater Toronto area, there's a high population of South Asians and Black people belong to the Black community. And it is very hidden. So literally they'll sit and they'll talk about the elder abuse, but they can't get out of it and they don't know how to do it and they're financially dependent, and it's very cultural. So I think we need to hit at all points. We need to find the allies, but we need to make our narrative stronger than what society is telling them. It's a big job. That's why when we're here today, we're asking you to embrace this concept of changing the narrative, because I'm going to share another thing about Margaret Atwood, which is when she talked about last night, she talked about dystopia. She talked about, you can't have good characters. She goes, I'm the only person that probably read this book that only had a character who was only good from beginning to end. And she asked everybody else, who would read that book? Like, how many pages would you have to go in before you said, I'm not reading this book anymore? She goes, maybe 10 pages. She goes, I read it all the way to the end, hoping something would happen, and nothing happened. And she said, so why are there so many stories about dystopia? And it's because of the fear. Oh, if this is happening now, if we can interrupt the rights of women on the choices over their reproductive system, and what would it be if it would be the extreme? And Margaret's not happy that Handmaid's Tale is ringing so true. So we focus on the dystopia, and even though it's boring, we're asking everybody, let's change that narrative and let's focus on the utopia. It's not going to be easy, but we have to make that into an interesting conversation and have our society buy into it. Let's stop focusing on the negative and let's envision where we can and should be. Oh, sorry, Ariana just wanted to add something. Sure.
Sorry, I know I'm not hard.
Yes, you are.
I'm not earnest here. But your comment did sit with me as I've been working with young women in the community, and they ask that question to me almost every time we do discussion. They say, I work here, I experienced this. And what we like to say, or I think this standpoint for all of us, is that it's never your fault. You didn't bring it on yourself.
And when we look at our survey results from the workshops that we're running in the community, the major themes that we're pulling and the major takeaways is that women are not saying that was a great physical self-defense class. Like they like it when we do some stuff, they're like, that's great. But the biggest takeaway is, wow, I learned to use my voice today. And as a society, we're conditioning women, even though we learn the words yes and no from a small age, and condition that out of women to sit in the uncomfortable, to be comfortable feeling uncomfortable, and to be silent. And so when we learn how to say no and practice that boundary setting, we're seeing that people are saying, I feel a lot more confident just walking down the street. Not because I know I can palm heal someone, but because if something happens, I can say stop, or I can call for help, or someone's going to believe me. And sorry, my other point just before I go take my seat is that what we also say is a lot of people say, I'm scared to say no to someone, they're my friend or my partner or my family. And so as challenging as it is to reflect on those relationships, we often ask, if you feel uncomfortable saying no to somewhere, if someone has created a situation or an environment where you don't feel like you can express yourself, is that a healthy relationship? Is that something that you are actually safe in? And it's a big question to sit with, but we encourage everyone to sit with that because we all have the right to say no and to feel safe and feel comfortable. And so it's these situational-based activities that we want to practice it and normalize going back to no, and no is a full sentence, and I don't have to provide an excuse or any other description.
You figure, and thank you. And we have these two questions. Up one over here.
Hello, everyone. My name is Tracy Ramsey. I come from the largest the private sector union in Canada called Unifor. We represent 118,000 women. I'm the women's director here with our delegation representing those sisters. So I want to talk to you about working class women. We've created a program called the Women's Advocate, which we've bargained into 475 collective agreements, which is someone in the workplace that women can go to when they're seeking assistance in their community or with an experience that they're having with harassment, violence, in their workplace or at home. But we partnered with the University of Western Ontario on a study many years ago about can work be safe when home, and understanding the implications of violence at home and how that leads into the workplace, and also providing safe workplaces for women. Canada has recently signed on to the ILO C-190. Of course, we're looking forward to what that implementation will look like in our country in real experiences for women. But the question I want to ask you, because we have many policies that exist, anti-harassment, we have training, we have courses, we have offered pledges, we have done everything conceivable to think of. The issue that we have is sustainability. How do we have that ongoing sustainability where people in the workplace know and understand what is acceptable and what isn't, and then how women who experience that in the workplace are able to understand and know what programs or what access they have to what is available to support them in their communities, but in our workplaces too. You come in and do training, which I imagine is fabulous, but then how does that sustain itself through new hires, through people coming in? What is the accountability looking back into places that you've left?
First, thank you for the question, and thank you for the great work that you're doing. I think it's fantastic that it is embedded in your negotiation as a union and as representation. Incredible. I would say that this is part of human development. How we're training needs to be in every onboarding process for every incoming employee. It needs to be engaged every year with some type of refresher course. And I would say that all the work that you've put into it already, I would liken it to the example of putting more lights in the parking lot, adding panic buttons on the door, right? Those are all great things. But until we give the skill set to the individual, we're not going to have the impact that we need to have. And that's what I mean by we're not putting enough money into it. We are putting a lot of money into these programs, but it's not the right it's not the right programs. It's check the box training. And something I wanted to mention in my presentation, human resources used to be a department that took care of the employee, had looked for the employee. Now it is somehow transitioned to become a department that protects the employer. And I think that shift needs to change. That needs to be. something needs to happen there. And so if we can embed this human development around these human safety skills into the human resources department, I think that's where we make the most change. But this has to be ongoing. This is training that continues, workshops, upgrades, refreshers, all of these things to have the impact that we need to have. I want you to add a sentence. And the sentence I want you to add is how you are training that system, macro. It's not that you're coming in and doing an external trainings. You're changing their corporate culture.
Yes. Okay.
So a little bit of what we're doing with macro, we are influencing the policing in the city of Oakland. And it is changing what response looks like in your community. That's what's happening. So the dominoes that normally were falling in the wrong direction are now falling in the right direction. That's that change and shift that Jyoti has been looking for us, that narrative shift. And now the supervisor, the first official supervisor for macro, will have the skill set already and continue to strengthen it. It is going to change. We are reimagining public safety in Oakland because of this skill set.
The only thing I would add is that we need to do a culture shift. And you can't do a culture shift if you don't engage the upper levels. Nobody started at management. Everybody started on the ground, right? Like from entry level. So they've experienced all of those things. They just might not remember it. So for us at Nellies and our management team, we believe in what we're doing, but we wouldn't be able to do it if we didn't sell it to our board. If our board, who is above me, who represent the community, didn't believe in it. So for me, the one thing I would say is that we need to return to working together and to engage, because it can't just come from bottom down. Like, of course, that will have an effect, but it has to come from top down too.
That was one of the things that came out of our summit that we hosted last year, is that yes, we have to have policies and procedures and protocols and reporting. All of this has to be there, yes. But it also has to come from here, right? It has to be supported from the top and then built up from the bottom to have a real cultural shift. So I think that is all the time we had. And then just out of respect for the group that is coming in next to set up, we have just a couple more questions. I also want to say that the conversation will never end, but today continues at 1:30. We're hosting a meetup and an opportunity to connect further with PAVE representatives, myself, Arlie, Frederica, Julie at the back, also our board member and CEO of ESD Global, Pete Sigmund. A lot of opportunity for having these important, vital conversations. If you haven't already signed up for it on the VUVA app, it is at number 21 West 46th Street and 5th Avenue. And that will be at 1:30 today. So lots of opportunities to carry on this conversation, which is vital. Love the questions so far. What house session in all of the workhouse? The workhouse. Yeah. Please, your next question.
Okay, my name is Jana Anderson. I'm also from the School of Environmental Studies Education Foundation. I'm also 17. My question is leveled. I am at my old job. I experienced a lot of harassment about my body, my weight, my race, and my gender. We talked about in this thing about coworkers to coworkers and the harassment and people to people outside of work. And I also want to say too, which is so disgusting to me, is when I'm walking down the street or I'm at work, and it happens so much when I'm at work because I'm a teenage girl alone in a store, and a man comes up to me and comes with a sort of conviction. And the first thing he says to me is, "How old are you?" And I say 17. He goes, "Never mind," and walks away. And it's like waiting for permission to harass me. But my question is, one, let me say one more thing. HR takes like a while to process, and I have been harassed by coworkers where that has happened, but also I've been harassed by customers. and I'm a minor. I don't know what to do. And we're supposed to be these great saleswomen, and we can't talk back to the customer or else I'll get fired because I can't be rude. How can workplaces protect their workers right away? I would like to be defended. I want to stand up for myself, but it shouldn't be you stand up for yourself or you have a job. You can't have both. How can workplaces protect their workers?
Thank you. Thanks very much. I think first and foremost, I want to say that I'm very sorry that those things are happening to you, and they shouldn't be. I think that one of the things that PAVE tries to do with our clients is to create a violence reduction plan, a workplace violence reduction plan. And he asks that all stakeholders are at the table. So there's representation from all stakeholders. And this has got to be a fluid plan. It's not something that's going to be put on paper and not ever change. It has to be a fluid plan. So I think those conversations, one, need to start. But again, I go back to empowering you, to giving you the skill set and the confidence to be able to maneuver those situations in the best way for you. Thanks. Acknowledge you, someone like, back up, buddy. Can I help you with this shirt? You don't need to know what age I am. Is this a shirt you're interested in? Just giving you that swag, giving you the ability to lay those boundaries, to set those boundaries down. You have time? I have time for one last question. Thank you very much. Appreciate that.
Not much to say.
Nope. Thanks for not giving me the little makeup brush. My name is Jyoti Phipps. My pronouns is she and her, and I come from the unceded traditional lands of the Clyde First Nation, which is colloquially known as British Columbia, Canada. My union is the British Columbia General Employees Union. I want to thank you for the work that you're doing, but something that I haven't heard here, and the reason I'm standing up and saying this is because I fit into your statistics. 1 in 10 of 15 years old. That is not my story. My story is 6 to 16. So you two young ladies over there, as soon as you came up and started talking, I wanted to say something to make sure that you understood something. It's important that we teach people to value themselves. Because when this happens to us, you are devalued. And you have to be able to use your voice. It doesn't matter that buddy's asking you, how old are you? Not your business. Why are you asking me? And we get so fearful that we can't speak about our bodies. And we could speak about our bodies because we own them. They are ours. So if someone is asking you something, straight up, sisters, say, no, get away from me. You don't need to ask me that question.
Thank you. Your question? I to the top at washroom. That was really it. What a great one.
Along with some thank you to you, because the work you do is very important, because there needs to be less of this kind of behavior in our world. And I've lived it, I've seen it, and I use my own lived experience to make other people realize it. So I strongly applaud you.
Thank you. Thank you.